Well, we're going to start.
Sorry.
I'm going to do it. Just say it.
This is James Rosebush, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, the Break It Down show is always doing things like having people like James Rosebush on, and James has a fantastic background. You all should look him up. You'll be impressed because he used to work for President Reagan and has worked in D.C. for a long time. We had your neighbor on. We had Robert Hunter on the show. We were talking about some of the current events war-wise because, as we all know, when the U.S. gets involved in war, we struggle to identify what the goal is, and we really struggle to reliably get to that goal. So I thought I would ask you, what are your thoughts on, I guess we'll start in Israel. What are your thoughts with Israel, Hamas, and the conflict there?
I think that you said something very important, and that is that I always think of Churchill in this regard because Churchill was in his lifetime had defeats, he had victories, and he was a student of history. And as you know from his famous remark, there is the further we can look back, the farther we can go ahead. And today we have a world that doesn't look back. Our leaders don't look back. They're not educated in history. They don't have a record of negotiating with our adversaries. They don't have a record of negotiating with our friends. And they also lack a third point, and that is an understanding of why we're fighting. Because what you have on the scene today is you have a lot of chaos, which is a result of not knowing exactly, other than you think it's good to destroy your enemy or to destroy your competitor, but then you don't know what you're going to do once you do it, or you're not doing it for a specific purpose to basically achieve more liberty, as what we used to think in terms of, I guess, beginning really back in the early 19th century and the early 20th century, that what we were doing in the world, especially for the United States, was that we were not only serving as a model for independence, for freedom, and liberty for all human beings, but we were a standard for that. And we were considered a light in the world. And generally speaking, people considered the U.S. and America and American ideals being placed here for a specific purpose, for a specific global purpose. So now you ask me, what do I think about Israel and Palestine, right? So there are a lot of complexities here because we don't know exactly why Israel had a massive intelligence failure. That hasn't really been resolved yet, why they did. I think one of the interesting things was that, of course, Hamas wanted to trigger Israel to do exactly what it has been doing, because it has turned the world upside down in terms of positioning and support from different corners of the world and different and not just corners of the world, but the position that people have taken within so many different countries now. And it also, we're in a period where there's a high demand for not only political leaders, but college students, man on the street, woman on the street, that you're supposed to have an opinion. So it wasn't always this way. It wasn't always that you had to have an uninformed opinion that was basically influenced by what you saw on, or what you read about, what you saw, or what was pushed out to you on social media, telling you this is the way you're supposed to think. This is Israel killing Palestinians. This is Palestinians killing Israelis. But how much further and how much deeper does it go, and why? So ever since Israel existed, the resolution in the Middle East, there was no resolution in the Middle East. And I consider to be an adjunct failure on the part of the whole world to actually solve that problem. But a lot of people, and there were a lot of interests that did not want it to be solved. So you had immense and powerful forces that wanted to keep this conflict hot. And there are people, of course, that benefit from this. So you have not only Iran, but you have other countries that benefit from this chaos. And it's a part of, I think, a certain kind of world order to keep chaos hot. And there are people who benefit from this, not just people who run industries to mass produce war material. Of course,
Yeah.
that, and including in our country, the whole, all of the industry that's really creating all of the missiles that we're supplying and the artillery and so forth, that's doing very well. Well, we like it as long as it's in our country, and we are making the decision about where it's going to go. But you have to look at that happening all over the world, and you have a big class of bad actors. So I think it's interesting to see that after Hamas made that shocking to everyone, made that strike, what the question was, what should have Israel done? I mean, it was going to be a textbook run on what Israel was going to do, because you know that they were going to retaliate in some way at some time. And yet at the same time, I think people were thinking, wait a minute, is this really the best strategy for Israel to come out on top? And I'm not sure that Israel has really considered other ways to come out on top in terms of the way the world is gauging what they did or what they could do. You follow me?
Man, like you said, it's complex right from the start. And yes, I do follow you. And I want to add some complexity, because it's easy to look at Israel and Palestine and pick a side and be like, that's it. And then you wind it back and you're like, oh man, Israel acted like a bunch of assholes here. And then you go wind it back and you're like, well, Palestine continues to. And so you're trying to balance the scale. Let me pull the scope back. We don't like that Iran is funding Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, and fighting a proxy war. But we're in the middle of a war that we have a proxy fighting for us against Russia. And so, like, when you point your finger too hard, all of a sudden you realize, you know what? We are the biggest military industrial complex in the world. And we have all these things where we're not so innocent ourselves. I mean, the next time America blows up a wedding won't be the first or last. You know, we have our own marks. So when we look at this, how involved should we be? I mean, how we can't lay claim to having anywhere near a perfect record.
We have to be as involved as we can to protect the American people.
Okay.
That's the answer to that. And does that involve being active abroad in all of these theaters? Yes, I would say so. Because if you look back at Reagan's, basically copying what Israel had, the dome strategy to as a deterrent and for protecting American people against the threats of Soviet rockets being fired, nuclear warheads being fired at the American people, and everyone gasped at Reagan's plan to do that in his strategy, although that had been proposed many times before Reagan brought it back up. I think it was absolutely a brilliant thing to do, but that was something that was tactical as well as strategic. So in the strategic part, it had an immediate impact on our relationship with the Soviet Union, and it had an impact on how they responded to it, right? So that was and also tactical, because it involved the creation of the ability to protect the American people from nuclear strikes. So that was sort of, in my viewpoint, an ideal way of not only defending your own people, but making a statement on the global stage that was powerful enough to keep our enemies at bay. Okay. And remember Reagan's statement also that the end result was always, we win, they lose. And he made that known widely around the world. And it sounds like a simple thing to say. And it was, of course, it was a quote from Lao Tzu, but he loved that. And it was something that was said with with intentional purpose, and it found its perfect target because people heard it and it meant something to them, that the United States was never going to abandon its responsibility to not only to Americans, but to American ideals that were everywhere. So, this is both what we've seen in Israel with Hamas is both a long-term problem and a short-term problem, because, as I said, there are a lot of people that benefit from what seems like decades and decades and decades of chaos. Yep. They would like to see that continue because, in a way, the Syrian issue, the Iranian issue, all of those interests are benefited by the chaos because it basically shields them from being the target. But one of the biggest challenges, I think, when you talk about, isn't it America's failing as well, or isn't America complicit? Well, yes, but I think probably I would consider America being complicit in this, maybe in a different way than how you described it or you would have described it. And that is, we aid and abet our enemies over and over and over again.
Oh boy, yes, we do.
So, and this is for various purposes. I mean, it used to be because we would supply arms to them, but the whole relationship between the U.S. and Iran has been, in my viewpoint, a complete failure and incredibly hard to parse, because if we're supplying or we're even allowing Iran to do any research in the area of nuclear power, it is abandoning U.S. principles and abandoning the American people. So there are things like that. When you say, is this a result of American failure as well? I think so, without a question. I think one of the reasons that Reagan largely, and I saw him get very angry at both Israel and very angry at Hamas. And right. At that time, there were different actors with regard to the Palestinian people. But I saw him get angry at both. I think that we have to consider a couple of things here, and that is that we need to have a better definition of what the American purpose is. We used to have, a major doctrine that set forth what our foreign policy would be in different parts of the world, and it was accepted by a number of presidents, and that's the way we conducted ourselves. I think that's been, to use an inappropriate term, that's been blown up. I think it's become a very divisive kind of theater in terms of how both the State Department and the Pentagon view what our relationships are in any number of theaters. And by the way, I gave a recent talk about the fact that, and few people really recognize this or would be able to answer this question, but at this time, there are 31 military conflicts around the world.
That's right.
It's not just the conflicts that we see right now and are preparing to have, I believe, in the case of Taiwan. So are we standing up enough for the belief that Reagan supported, that America was put here for a broader purpose than just creating a country that is known for and built on personal freedoms, but has been put here to be the light of the rest of the world. And that's what Reagan said: when the light of American exceptionalism grows dim, the rest of the world goes into chaos. And that's exactly what we have now. Without U.S. leadership globally, and it doesn't mean that we have to get involved in wars, but it does mean that we have to be the guiding light and to show leaders in other countries why one strategy can be more successful for their people than others. But I've been working on this book, my fourth book, which is called "The Rise of Leadership and the Decline of the Rise of Politics and the Decline of Leadership."
Yeah,
I have to tell you, Pete, it's a very difficult thing to do, to define great leadership today.
Mm.
When you think about it, you ask yourself, who do I see today, whether in running countries or companies? Who do I see today that I would turn to as an example of great leadership? Well, there obviously are great leaders in the world, but they're hard to find. They're hard to find. And I think that in part it's because we've moved from the strategic to the tactical. And by moving to the tactical, things become much more political. They become much less idealistic. And I think we forget how important the contribution of the ideal is to our success. People need to have ideals and live by them and demonstrate them. And I think that's what, not just in the United States, but I think all over the world, I think there were people who had, whether they were good ideals or not, there were people that lived by ideals. Today, I think people who are leading countries do make a lot of decisions based on a tactical way of thinking. You know, what are we going to do next, basically, to keep, how am I going to keep my party in office? How am I going to stay in office? How am I going to, so it's all, that's what I mean by the rise of politics. And even this is in a broad sense, in how am I going to retain my position as chairman of a company? I mean, we just saw this last week with what happened. And I think with the AI company.
OpenAI? Yeah, right. OpenAI.
Yeah, I think that was really fascinating, because you hire and you recruit, you hope, wise leaders to oversee the company as board of directors. But in this case, that might not have happened. And you had this kind of revolt. I think that is like a showpiece for what's going on in the world. There's not, you know, is there confidence in leadership? Well, what is leadership, and what is it comprised of, and what responsibilities does it have? And I think I have to tell you, I think just in the 2 years I've been working on this book, the whole concept of leadership has migrated.
It's interesting because when you do look, you have the theoretic, you have the strategic, you have the political, and all these different realms to kind of master and think about. And right now we have not even contrarian. Some of the people in our country are anti-Aryans or whatever. Like, they don't even want to have the conversation. And so you find that Osama bin Laden's become in vogue again. And we're looking at people that, these are people that wanted to tear down statues of Lincoln. You're like, what are we doing? Like, we can't agree. If we can't agree that Lincoln was a pretty good dude, then where are we at? So we have someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, and I get that he's a political divisive figure because he goes one direction, and a lot of people disagree with that. But then you look at Israel's history. I mean, he's been the prime minister most of the last 30 years for Israel. I mean, there's been other prime ministers, but he is the guy that gets most of the credit for where they're at, and they're in a great place. They were stabilizing their region through business and innovation. I mean, no country, pound for pound, person for person, is innovating harder and faster than Israel. So, but we're not allowed to like that because he's been successful and he doesn't agree with a political thing. And so we'll pick Hamas over Netanyahu. And this kind of goes to your point of, like, here we have someone who's a good leader. His method is working. You may not like it. You may not like his means and everything, but there he is. He's doing it. So maybe
Pete, you're making the exact, you're telling it really the way it is, because what happens is when you're succeeding, and with the Benjamin Accords and relationships more, I think the relationships really in the Middle East that Israel was forging was a remarkable time. But
it really was.
But think about it. It's just the same way with our country. There are so many evil forces that live on chaos. Do you think that everyone in the Middle East wanted Israel to forge productive relationships with other countries in the Middle East?
No.
No.
Not like that.
So you have to watch you have to watch not only and plan for the successes of your company or your country. You have to watch at who's and understand who's trying to destroy it, because it's a drumbeat every day and every night. There are forces within our country and outside that want to see it destroyed. Well, why would that? Why would anyone want to destroy America? Because they want to gain power over us. They want to gain power and they want control. And in a lot of these, look what just happened in Argentina. Very, very interesting, right? After decades and decades and decades of incredible inflation, I had a client who was living in Argentina and he needed American dollars sent to him. Do you know what Argentina would do if I had to send him, I don't know, $100,000 or something like this, and as a part of his inheritance. And he said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Don't send me American dollars. At this time, this is maybe 2 years ago. And he said, because the government automatically takes 75% of any money that's sent to someone in Argentina. Okay. So, what's going on there is the forces that are either ignorant or they are in a position where they want to create chaos within a government, in a country, or in a culture. And that is a strong, I think, intention on the part of a lot of people in our own country right now. It isn't, certainly there are people in history, you mentioned tearing down, Thomas Jefferson or, people who've been contributed to American culture. It isn't that they're perfect. They've made mistakes. There's no question about it. But can you point to anyone today that is taking a position or doing things for our country that's exactly perfect either? Well, no. They were at least striving, and they contributed to what became a very important and the most powerful country in the world, and a light for and a path for individual liberty by and for the millions and millions of immigrants who came to this country and continue to come in this country. Why do they want to be here? Because they think they can find freedom and prosperity. That's why they're here. Okay. So why is it that all these people continue to come here, and yet people in our own country are not satisfied with the degree of freedom that they think they have? So they want to tear it down. Well, that, I'm sure, comes from other elements that people that are in basically the category of wanting to control and to destroy and to create a chaotic environment rather than a productive one. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to
let's talk about something nice, right? If you can find it.
It's there's all these topics are so big, right? And I'm fascinated, and right now I'm working on establishing this. I hate to call it a think tank, but what is called a think tank, where we're trying to improve our abilities abroad in our foreign policy. One of the things that I've noticed that we do is we love to export our problems, and so we'll say, hey, whatever country it is. We think you should focus on sexual orientation and gender and female and all these things. And look, I'm not saying I'm against these things, but what I am saying is when you go to Hungary, when you go to Yemen, when you go to all these different countries and you say, we've found your solution, and you don't even know the problem, that's bad foreign policy, because what if your foreign policy is off target? And I know you'll get this when you're not a politician, but when you're a policymaker, and you miss the mark, and we pull out of Afghanistan and we leave all these people, just abandon them, to include our allies, like the French and all the French Afghans who got stuck out there, right? When we do these things and we miss our mark, where's the accountability at the highest level? Who's going to pay the price for being wrong about
it should
whatever?
Be the taxpayer that is holding its government accountable. This is, remember, I have to just quote Reagan all the time, because not only did I work for him and admire him and learn so much from him, but he got all this right. he believed that the U.S. government worked for the people, not the other way around. Now, in socialism, which some people would like to see in the United States as a socialist nation, the people are the servant of the government. And now, how does that work? So you're talking about accountability. So when, let's say, all these multilateral organizations like the UN, which basically wants to create a universal socialist state, and the UN wants to dictate what every country should be able to do in nutrition, childbirth, sexual orientation, medical devices, all this kind of stuff. I mean, if you look into what the United Nations is doing right now, it's a plethora of requirements, of all kinds of edicts and plans that they're putting forth to all members of the United Nations that this is what they should be doing in their country. Well, now, where did this come from? I mean, who gives them the power to basically legislate over all of these countries? But they're doing it. Just take a quick look at that, and you'll be aghast. So there are a lot of forces that are really work against preserving the model that we have here, which originally was that people have the right to determine what kind of government we have and how the government is going to behave. And without, I have a friend who does almost every day, it's his job to do FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. So he's constantly asking for, and he gets, unless some of the material is redacted, of course, he gets material from the Justice Department, the Department of Education, the CIA, and so forth. And the stuff that he uncovers is so monumental and so shocking that, it's hard for people to, if you read it, you'd be like, well, why wasn't this disclosed? Because we have media that has become a business rather than media that I think was originally considered, perhaps in the Constitution, that we needed a free media, a free press to, I think, hold the government accountable to the people and report to the people on what the government was doing, and the private sector as well. But today, the media largely takes a political position.
Yeah,
that's not helpful for any of us to really see the full story. And now it's going to be even more difficult because we can see not only the media, but other agencies of information using generative AI to basically instruct and inform and to move policy and to get politicians elected or not. So it's a complex situation, how the manipulation of information and misinformation can be used as a powerful tool. Again, for what? To control you. Do you want the government to control you? Is that the way we live? Okay. Do you want one of the things that I have to tell you, Pete, that really bothers me? It's a little peak that I have, that every time you'll see a president, it's not just Biden, but the president will say, well, I've asked, don't even ask the Congress usually, but we're giving, $60 billion, $40 billion, whatever it is to support Ukraine. Well, where does that money come from?
Yeah.
I believe that there should be a law that anytime a lawmaker says the U.S. is giving, you would have to be required to say the U.S. taxpayer is giving. I'm okay with their making decisions about the disposal or the distribution of funds, but I am not okay with their taking the credit for it and saying, okay, the government has made this decision. That is my money and that's your money. It comes from every hour that I work, every day that I work. I am a part of sustaining the war initiative in Ukraine. Now, I want to get credit for that. I don't want the Appropriations Committee deciding that it's government money. That sounds like a socialist state to me.
And when that money isn't being spent well, I understand we can vote people out, and we should, but who is going to hold the bag? Look, Secretary Blinken has got a pretty bad record of getting stuff right. So, and we can pick whoever we want, but there's all kinds of folks who make big decisions, and when it doesn't land, what do we do? We seem to miss the mark quite a lot, and that's at the policy level. Now you have to apply it to the tactical level, and there's just no connection at all between where we're trying to go and what the folks on the ground, that lieutenant on the ground, who's got no earthly clue how to normalize relations between a fledgling government and a society. Like, that's not their job.
Okay, so let me ask you this question.
How do you do it? Yeah, go ahead.
Why did Biden immediately jump on Air Force One and go over there and hug Bibi Netanyahu? Why do you think he did that?
Because it briefs well.
Because it's an election year. Okay.
Well,
now
it
backfired on him, right? So I think there again, I have to invoke Churchill. I have to say, you have to think about, and of course, this is what the National Security Council and several strategic commands are supposed to be doing. And I'm sure that they did this to a certain extent, but what if I do that? As president, what if I get on the plane and go there today? What could be? I want to know the 5 or 6 different outcomes that could produce. Okay.
Yeah.
Was that a good thing for him to do? Now, he didn't know what had been going on. I mean, I'm sure he was briefed to a certain extent, but he didn't know exactly what had happened in terms of the failure of Israeli intelligence, but he didn't know what was going to happen in terms of the backlash, in terms of the backlash against Israel. And I have to say that there's a lot of fear, even on American streets, on both sides, Palestinians and Jewish people as well. There's a tremendous amount of fear on both sides. And I think the reaction that we've seen in the U.S. was caught the administration by surprise. Well, it shouldn't have caught them by surprise. They should have played this out. What if this happens? What if that is a part of leadership, is testing. Okay, if I take this initiative, if I show up and I'm representing the United States, what is the ramification going to be? If I conduct myself in the shutdown of our forces in Afghanistan the way I did, what is the impact going to be? Well, that was catastrophic. And I think it's so interesting because Biden's own political party for years, and I know a number of these people, and they're very well-meaning, they have spent a lot of their own time and a lot of philanthropic dollars and government money in Afghanistan trying to build schools for women, for girls to be able to go to school, for hospitals. Tremendous amount of, think of all the military material that was left, for example, in Afghanistan. My gosh. I mean, it is unthinkable what the money, again, the American taxpayer put into trying to turn Afghanistan into a place that was living according to modern human standards of allowing women to work and be educated and young girls to go to school and to protect themselves. Oh, that's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. Yeah. And it's something that didn't have to happen. But that is what went down. But again, I have to say, where's the leadership that says, what if we do it this way? What if we do it that way? What is the outcome going to be? And Pete, not just look at the outcome or the possible outcomes in terms of their political cost. Okay. That is something that is fleeting. It's ephemeral. How can you know? Because politics can be one way one day, and another day, a poll can be just the opposite of what you see a poll of especially what we see in our economy right now. So I think this is one of the. It's great to talk to you. I'm sorry, I'm doing all the talking here. I want to hear you.
No, that's why I want you here. I want to hear from you.
I think that this whole concept of leadership, and I hope your audience will kind of send in some more ideas for me for this book I'm working on. I'd love to hear from them. I think that a lot of real leadership isn't necessarily telling someone what to do. It is thinking through and weighing the right, justifiably direction to go in versus the expense of failure.
Yeah.
This, I think, is not present today in all levels of what we might call the people who at least are in control of our institutions and are in control of, I had a conversation with someone today who was telling me, and I happened to be in LA, so I was having a conversation with someone high up in the entertainment industry, and he was saying that within X number of years, and he gave the number of years, but colleges and universities are going to be abandoned because number one, they are way out of proportion in terms of what you have to pay to go into one and get a degree, and secondly, are they really relevant to the kind of thinking that you need to have? And of course, I've been predicting this for a long time, and of course this is going to happen because universities are living in this position of, again, control, but are they really thinking through, well, this could happen? A true leader says, here are the options. This is what we have to consider might be the cost of going one direction, the cost of going that direction, and then ultimately weighing that and making a decision based on that, not based on money, power aggregation, political considerations. And when I say political, I'm talking about broadly. I'm not talking about political parties. I'm talking about people that are running institutions or have responsibility that want to maintain their position. They want to maintain their position. How are they going to do it? They think they're going to maintain their position by, sweetening the cup for other people, or, taking care of board members, or, putting themselves in a position where they think the institution can't survive without them. And I think that can be a fatal mistake.
Yeah.
So maybe, as we're talking about leadership, maybe this is one of the most important ingredients, that you have the ability to stop and to judge by looking at what could happen by going this direction, what could happen by going this direction. And if you find a failure there, the leader's responsibility is to stop that from happening.
Yeah. There's also the ability to say, I'm a leader. I need someone outside of this organization to check our decision making. So we had A, B, or C. I chose C. Did that work on our behalf? Because one of the things I would do, James, is I would go out after we went and did a med op or an agricultural operation or whatever it was in whatever part of the world I was in. And I would go a week later and I would say, hey, what happened here? And then they would tell me what happened, and it doesn't matter for me. Like, I'm just going to, whatever you got. And then I would look for little areas where I could tease things out. Like, no, the government came out here and they helped all of you. I saw you here. You're a farmer. And when they say, that's a performance, that's the U.S., that's important for a commander to know so they can lead and say, how do we get true buy-in from the Afghans? How do we improve that? But it's so rare. I would ask to go do these things and go evaluate the mission that we briefed that was wonderfully successful. And almost inevitably, I came back with a completely different reality that nobody liked because it smacked them in the face that, hey, we screwed that up. And so that ability to say, I need people outside my organization who can go out and evaluate how we're doing at the ground level. Are these decisions the right ones, or do we need to adjust in some way and take the politics out of it? Like, if the Democrat way is the way to go in this area, then okay, fine. Don't be bound up by your ideology, by your party, whatever. But I don't know that we have the courage to do that because those kind of leaders, they're not commonly promoted. At least not anymore.
No, and people don't accept the fact that decisions have consequences.
Yeah.
They want everything to be a soft landing, at least for them, right? So they're not willing to really stand up to, I think, values and principle. And I think that America is the one country. Most countries are basically there because they were originally owned by a royal family. They were, it has to do with geographics and how at any particular time throughout history, geographical boundaries were set, wars were processed, and boundaries changed. But it was all about boundaries and land. The United States was built on ideals, and it's shared in that respect by a handful of other countries as well. But because we're formed, our basic form of government is an idealistic one, and freedom is an idealistic form of thinking. And it's something that has to be fed and sustained. Reagan again said that we're only ever one generation away from losing our individual freedoms, because there's always a desire in terms of the collectivist society to do things as a community, do things as an organization, do things as a political party. And also because of this encroaching approach to leadership, which is more control than leading. When you're really leading people, you're leading people into and with the ability to do things on their own, to exercise their own talents, their own freedom to act. That's really what you're doing as a leader in a democratic organization. And you see these ideals are part of the fabric of America, and they're supported by, again, another person who's been really slammed historically speaking. And I know he definitely, without question, according to today's conversation, is easily blamed. But Thomas Jefferson, I like to go to his memorial about at least once a year and just read some of the great things that he wrote and what he thought. And he didn't always live what he thought, but do any of us. But he had a desire to live that way. And I think even the desire to live that way and to accept the principles of, I swear on the altar of God eternal hostility against anything that would restrict, basically, how the end of it goes, to restrict individual freedoms. Now, that's a pretty powerful statement. He was working not just in his own behalf, in his own interests, but these people served their country. Did they have flaws? Yes, they had flaws. Do people have flaws today? Yes, no question. But if you take the good that they did for us and its impact on the lives that we can lead today, again, I have to say that's why millions of immigrants struggle to come to America, because they see probably America more as an ideal than an idea, which America really is an idea. And that, again, is the way Reagan saw it. And I love that the last talk he gave from the Oval Office at the end of his second term, if you remember, he said, and one of my friends was in the Oval Office because they were part of producing it, and there were two people in the Oval Office that night, and they were both producers. And one said to the other, "Is he okay? Is he okay?" And because she saw Reagan's kind of slumping down in his desk behind the great resolute desk, the gift from Queen Victoria. And the other woman said, "Oh no, he's fine. That's what he does before every televised speech." And she said, and obviously what it was, he was praying. And that was, and remember, I think I told you this story that was going into a cabinet meeting, and one day, and one of the members of the cabinet said to the president, "I think we should start cabinet meetings with a prayer." And the president looked at him and said, "Oh, I already have."
Yeah.
I think it says everything about Reagan. He felt inside, but he
Mhm.
kept a lot inside. But he felt, and again, going back to the night, the last speech he gave from the Oval Office, he said, "I've spoken a lot about the shining city on a hill," which was the way that it was America was described in its earliest days, uh, before it was really it had much of a structure for it. And he said, "I don't think I've ever explained what I saw when I said that." But if you follow that, look up that speech.
Yeah.
Reagan was very liberal in a certain way, not politically speaking, but he was very liberal in what he saw as America's ideal serving the American people. He said that, for example, if there were walls, they had to be open to anyone who sought freedom.
Mm.
If there were, it was a part of being the idealistic view of what America really stood for. Does it always stand up to those ideals? Perhaps
No.
no, but at least
Right.
we have them. And without them, we're completely without promise.
This I love this conversation, and you're reminding me. I interviewed Rich Little the other day, and
Yeah,
he is someone else who consistently talks about the greatness of Ronald Reagan, obviously from his point of view, and it's more about the the wisdom and the brilliance that he put together, and the jokes and letters those guys exchanged. But it's interesting where we can disregard Reagan as a leader because he was just an old white guy or whatever it is, but but there's all kinds of people who worked with him that have the same kind of experience that you guys have had, where it's changed how they've seen life. And he is very Churchillian in that, where you can quote him and take the things that he said and said, yeah, that still makes sense, even though he's been not been president for it'll be 40 years here pretty quick.
but Pete, I have to tell you something.
Yeah,
I get, I could just be walking down the street or walking to a grocery store or something, and if someone learns that I worked in the White House for Ronald Reagan,
yeah,
they come, they weren't even born yet. They come over to me and they say, "Could you just talk to me about Ronald Reagan?"
yeah, yeah,
They've heard that, and they've heard about the Reagan years, and uh, they want to know more. Now, of course, that's
right,
not everyone, no question.
right.
Not everyone wants to hear about Reagan, but I find it to be really interesting that
Mm,
there is such a hunger to learn again how and they I also have to tell you, I run into so many people who've named their children Reagan. They're,
really?
oh yes, I see that so much. Why did you name your it's a really thrilling thing for me to see that obviously they were honoring their child and their country and Reagan because they loved what
Yeah,
Reagan did for our country and for the world. Very interesting. I run into this all the time. Again, this is not everyone, but it
right.
is a lot. I get it a lot. Just talk to me about what Reagan was really like. And it has a lot to do, obviously, with how I feel about America. But I think that we need we need to, as a people, we need to think deeply about why America was put here and
Yeah,
it was why it was founded, what it was founded on, and its true values, aside from people who are always pointing out its failings. Well, I think if you put together, and I have to remind myself of this all the time because you read so many bad things because the media really is in business to report bad news. They're not really,
always,
and unfortunately,
always.
they're not in the business of reporting good news. They think people don't want to hear it. But you have to remind yourself all the time that for every bad thing that has happened, whether it's these awful, awful, awful things that happen in communities and where people are hurt, or things are going on where people are trying to control quality and character of children, you see that at the same time, these terrifying stories, you read these terrifying stories, a million times more at that very moment, good was going on. People were helping each other. They were taking each other to the hospital. They were cooking meals for each other. They were taking care of each other's children. They were good teachers. They were, good parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to remind yourself that, and America is the biggest philanthropy field. I mean, there's so much money that's invested in good causes to improve our society. So I have to remind myself all the time, because you read stuff that is very demoralizing and very discouraging. But at the same time, there's a tremendous amount more good going on than bad.
Yeah. And this is such a great point. And the news, they make money reporting all this terrible stuff. You never can name who the Nobel Prize winners are because they don't ever cover those people. Or like, there's no news story that said last night Pete, Jason, and Todd got together because they're lifelong friends, and whenever they do, they laugh and they had a great time. Next report, like they never say that, and so it's always this stuff where so and so was shot, and you're like, how do you know who that person is, and why would they get, and it's just violence and anger. I frankly, I don't watch the news because of that. I know you're short on time, so I don't want to take any more of it. Is there anything that you want to say in closing?
I think I've said my closing already. I think that, again, I am searching for leaders. I'm searching for leadership. I'm searching to really understand what the word leadership is all about and should be about, because I think we've gone through a period of turmoil about understanding the real role of a leader. And, this is interesting because at one time I was leading a school, and my objective was really to turn it into a leadership academy. And at that time, there were a lot. There were thousands and thousands of leadership academies all over in public schools and private schools. There was a real focus on leadership, but I've seen that kind of quiet down. And I just wonder if it hasn't been the result of a confusion about what a real leader does. Does a leader inspire to action? Mm-hmm. Does a leader protect? Does a leader share values? Is a leader someone you admire? Is a leader someone that you follow? Mm. And I think we really need, as a nation, as a people, as a family, we need to think about what a real leader is and what those qualities, what leadership qualities really include. And I think we need to have a national discussion about that. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to shut up too, is when I think about a leader, I think of someone who can build a consensus, who can unify. And we often focus so hard on diversity that we lose sight of the fact that you have to have a direction. And that requires unity. Unity and diversity are really, they're poor antonyms, but they're antonyms. And so you have to have someone that can take that wonderful U.S. Diversity that we already have. You don't have to create. Just scoop it up. It's all around you. And then unify that group, and you'll have a powerful solution to a problem. But we struggle with that for some reason. So anyhow, man, this is great having you on. I wish I had time to come up and see you up in LA where you are, but we will get together soon. Let me roll the credits here. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you